My name is Joshua Gibson, and you are listening to the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast, a show dedicated to promoting a message of critical thinking as it pertains to strength training, nutrition, and well-being. This is done through interviews with experts, high-level athletes, coaches, and people heavily involved in strength sports and athletic development. Pull up a chair, grab a coffee, and let's get on to today's podcast. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast. My name is Joshua Gibson. I'm your host, and I'm joined today by the one and only. As I was telling him what we were going to talk about and how I was going to set up the show, I was kind of mentioning that he's the best, arguably the best coach in weightlifting at the moment. It works at the highest level in strength and conditioning in the high school setting. So it's a guy who has essentially done both at the highest levels. That's Spencer Arnold. Thanks for joining me, Spencer.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Super excited to get to chat a little bit, especially if we get to chat about some of the more fun things I do other than tell people to keep the bar closer, get their knees back.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we were right as we were hopping on, you kind of mentioned Catapult and tracking player data as far as how much they're moving, what the accelerations look like, all that good stuff, right? All that information, all the data you kind of process to get a picture of player load or training load. Maybe you can backtrack quite a bit for me, because I have this image, and I don't know if this is right or wrong, but maybe back in 2013 you worked with Outlaw, which was kind of like this CrossFit weightlifting thing.
Yeah.
And I don't quite know the details. I just remember I was watching MDUSA. I was kind of into Cal Strength and all the weightlifting stuff. And I remember hearing your name, hearing Outlaw. And then you kind of came on the scene when you wrote that article that I read about collecting data. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting. So we did a podcast, and then the next thing I know, you're coaching, multiple Olympians. So maybe we can backtrack quite a bit. I would say even before, people know you competed in weightlifting, and you did all the barbell stuff. But even before that, where did the interest at all in athletics come from?
Yeah, man. So I went to a little bitty, well, not little bitty, about mid-sized high school in a little bitty town in Gainesville, Georgia, Johnson High School. And I just loved sports and wanted to be involved in every sport that I could be in. Unfortunately, I was a very small kid. So, sports weren't really anything I was ever going to be even it's varsity level if I didn't figure out being small. And so that naturally led me to the weight room. And so I walked in the weight room, and the guy standing in the weight room for the strength and conditioning coach and defensive coordinator for a football team was Stan Luttrell. Stan Luttrell is one of the most renowned high school strength coaches in Georgia, really in the country. But at the time, he was just figuring out Olympic lifting. So he was just getting his toe in the water, and I was I became the guinea pig or project, whichever you want to call it. In many ways, he is still a second dad to me. But he, people don't know much. A lot of people don't hear that name and immediately perk up. But in his span in high school strength coaching and up in this end of the world, he was the one that found and started and sent Jenny Arthur to the Olympic Training Center. Same thing with Megan Poole. There's multiple Olympic level, not international level weightlifters that he got started. But I was his very, very first project when it came to Olympic weightlifting. And so naturally I never got good at sports. There's nothing, you can't outdo genetics. But I did find a knack for weightlifting. And so I kind of followed him around for a while. And then eventually I got my undergraduate degree from UGA, which was actually in religious studies. And then my wife and I got married and moved to Dallas, Texas. I was going to go get my master's in Christian education so that I could come back and be in a private school. So that in theory, I didn't know what I was going to do, right? I thought maybe I'd be a pastor, maybe I'd start a church, but I was definitely doing weightlifting stuff. Went to Dallas and was able to help create a weightlifting program in a CrossFit gym there. And then while I was going to seminary, and one of the weightlifters that walked into that program, his name was Jason Hogan. Jason Hogan was one of Rudy Nielsen's like most prolific CrossFitters at the time. And so I started coaching him in weightlifting. And Rudy, who was the owner then, I guess it still is now, of the Outlaw Way, liked what I did. And so he brought me on way back when this was, there was like Invictus was around. But that was really about it back then, right? Like Mayhem wasn't really a thing yet. This was back in Rich's like heyday. And so it was just us. And we started Outlaw Way and traveled the world teaching people to lift weights and be better at CrossFit. And then eventually that came to an end. When that came to an end, I was also finishing seminary about that time. And we had our first baby girl, and Megan and I moved back to Georgia to be near family. And as we were looking for what to do, I was finishing a master's in Christian education, and there was a private school in Atlanta that reached out to me actually looking for somebody else. I said, hey, do you know anybody? It's funny. The principal at that school, who was a good friend of mine, Hunter Chadwick, reached out to me and said, hey, I attended a seminar you did with Rudy. So it was fun. He attended a weightlifting seminar with Outlaw Way. And then he emailed me and said, hey, do you know anybody who's like you, right? Like has a degree you do and knows about weightlifting that would be interested in being a strength coach here. And I said, ironically, like we're moving back. Like I'm interested. And that legitimately is how I got my foot in the door in high school strength. And so we moved back. I took that job at Kings Ridge Christian School. And then from then of like one thing after another, right? So right about that same time that I moved back to Georgia, the Olympic Training Center, like 2 years later, I think they decentralized the Olympic Training Center for weightlifting. And so I ended up with, some people from there, Jordan Delacruz, Jesse Finn, Bradley, now Stemo, reached out to me and said, hey, we need a coach. I was still competing during that time. I had done some stuff nationally, but was definitely on the decline. And I thought they were crazy. Like, why would they pick? I legitimately I was like, you need to go talk to Juggernaut. I literally like drove to meet them at Travis Mash's place, to, like convince them to go with Travis. I was like, y'all should go here. Like, I'm not the guy for like, I'm just a high school strength coach. But they were persistent and then I started coaching them and really the rest is history, right? Like created Power and Grace when I left Dallas because the IRS was going to get mad at me for collecting money and not telling them about it. And so Power and Grace Performance exists because of the IRS. That is the only reason it exists. Everybody thinks it was like some clandestine thing. Like, nope. Like IRS got mad at me, so I had to create an LLC. I didn't know what to name it. One of my buddies said, hey, weightlifting's kind of like powerful and graceful, and you do coach some CrossFitters, like that would work. And so I was like, sure, Power and Grace Performance. The lion logo is based off a tattoo on his left arm.
Wow.
That like all of that is how that got started, and has done what it's done today. So, but I stayed in high school strength all the way through. Like, would leave the gym, leave the high school, drive to the gym, coach Jesse and Jordan, eventually Shayla and Morgan and everybody else that kind of joined along, and then I would go home. And so as time went on, that Power and Grace got bigger. And I got more involved. And so I actually left the school that I was at that had brought me there and moved to a school that was closer to my area of the state, like up near Northeast Georgia, and moved into Hebron Christian Academy where I'm at right now. And that's about 10 minutes away from where our location is. And so now it's a little easier for me to get to training and be around for training and stuff like that. And so that's how I ended up where I did. And I legitimately left undergraduate at Georgia thinking I was going to be a pastor. And 4 years later, I'm running Power and Grace. I'm a high school strength coach. And that's like exactly how it went down. I wish there was like, it'd be really cool if I could say like at 8 years old, I got this vision of what I was going to do. And I just like created a plan and followed it. Like, nope. I just walked into a weight room at 14 and wanted to get bigger so I could play a varsity sport and maybe get a date to homecoming. But that was like it, So, yeah. That's it.
You mentioned Stan Luttrell and you mentioned kind of, getting a good deal of exposure to, proper strength and conditioning from him and weightlifting coaching as well.
Yep.
Who else, do you kind of like reflecting back, view as mentors or people who have really influenced the way you operate? Because again, you said you went to school for religious studies and kind of took that direction with your education. So all of the coaching stuff had to be to some extent like extracurricular. So to
Yeah.
be able to develop an understanding of both weightlifting and strength and conditioning to operate at the highest level without formal education that kind of funnels you into reading, all the kind of classic books that people rattle off when you ask them like the books you should
Yeah.
read if you want to get into it. Like who do you view as your mentors or people who have had a huge influence on the way you operate today? This podcast is brought to you by Onyx Weightlifting Co. I've been very selective about finding sponsors for the show, but after much deliberation, in conversation with Chris and Danny, the co-owner and founder, we decided that Onyx is beyond a great fit to support this podcast. Onyx is a brand built on providing the strongest and most comfortable straps, wraps, belts, and apparel to the weightlifting community, with the leather products handcrafted by the same barbell calloused hands that you have. Make sure you pick up something today at onyxstraps.com using the code PHILWL for 10% off of your purchase. That is onyxstraps.com, ONYX straps.com, using the code PHILWL for 10% off of your purchase. And thanks as always for supporting the show.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Stan Luttrell at that same time, kind of growing weightlifting in the state of Georgia. Team Georgia was really big, and CJ Stockel is at the helm there. He's been so involved in weightlifting. I can't rattle off that resume. I mean, so many trips. I mean, involved at the board level, like very involved in weightlifting. But he was a high school strength coach too, and so him and inevitably like every coach I had along the way. So I ended up in Texas, like working underneath Richard Fleming and Tom Witherspoon, who were coaches for Chad Vaughn when he was doing the Olympic run. And so I got a lot of exposure to that there. And then also like when I left them and went to Ursula was my coach for a while. And so got a ton of exposure to weightlifting stuff through those four people. I mean, I would point to those four as like maybe the most major influences from that perspective. But like from a strength conditioning standpoint, I just like, I found myself around and in conversations and on phone calls and with people that were both weightlifting oriented, but also like in college and high school strength. But back then there was no such thing as a high school strength coach. Like if you were a high school strength coach, it's because you were the football coach and therefore you did the weight room. Like Coach Luttrell and Coach Stockel were kind of anomalies that like, that wasn't the real thing. So that's why I had to go the direction I did for, like with my degrees, because the only people that were really kind of doing that were private schools, not public schools. And so that's why I went private Christian education. But like I did end up on some cool phone calls with guys like Tommy Moffitt and Gail Hatch and, getting opportunities to be around them at meets. And, even then, like Matt Bruce was a really big influence on me. Like he was a guy that like grew up with the kind of the Moffitt method around and LSU around him, and got to meet, tell me a lot about what Gail did and how Coach Hatch worked with high school strength and with college strength and how his influences worked there. And then through all those people and through like legitimately through traveling the world with Outlaw, like I remember running into my first Russian manual, like on the border of Russia, and so like I being like, wait, this thing exists. And the next thing I know, I'm on Bud Charniga's website buying everything I can, and reading it like it's on every airplane. That's like, I remember reading these manuals on every airplane I was on during that time of my life. I remember finding out what the CSCS was through a seminar somewhere and being like, man, that sounds awesome. Like I didn't know that existed. And then realizing like it was a really big deal and studying for that and passing that just like, because I just stumbled upon them being around coaches and high school strength coaches and I remember going to my very first NSCA coaches conference and looking around and being like, dude, you are an imposter. Like everybody around you is way smarter. Like, and just like being in conversations and listening. I actually ran into Travis Mash. So this is a funny one. I met Travis when I was touring the seminary that I went to in Dallas. He was touring the same seminary.
Wow.
Neither one of us met because of weightlifting. We met because of seminary. He didn't end up going to seminary, and I did. And then that day, he'll tell you the story. He tells it better than I do. I told him, I was like, man, I'm into weightlifting, and he laughed at me. Like he thought I was hilarious, like because he looked at me. I'm a 69 kilo little weightlifter who'd done nothing in the weightlifting world. And then 2 years later, I won the American Open, and he was like, no joke, that guy really is into weightlifting, you know. And so Travis has been a massive influence on the strength and conditioning world for me because he's just introduced me to tons of people who I'm able to pick their brains, get on phone calls, and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? But then, like, you know, Josh, like my happy place is organized, progressive programming that like has a map, like a roadmap, and collects data to prove it's heading that direction. And so when high school strength started really becoming a thing in Georgia, nobody was really bringing that to the high school world. And so I didn't know any other way. And so I just started doing that here. And then over the course of time, I've like run into these like velocity based training methods and run into GPS tracking on athletes. And all I do is like find every resource I can, call every coach I can, go visit some people if I can go see it live. And it's weird how like the weightlifting community from Olympic weightlifting is like weirdly always integrated into all these places. Like when I went to UGA's Olympic strength conditioning department, Kat is a former Olympic weightlifter and is very, very close with CJ Stockel. And so like Kat basically opened the doors for me, and I was able to get and like pick the brain of all the UGA strength and conditioning staff, which was massive for me as I was getting into catapult and GPS data. So it really, man, I wish like the list of people that have influenced my career, like I would miss somebody. I could write 35 names and I'd be missing half of them. I'm not a product of formal education. I'm not a product of classrooms and certifications. I'm just a product of like really, really loving weightlifting and loving strength conditioning. And then just by God's good grace, being around really, really smart people who were kind enough to invest in me, you know?
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Mike Young. He runs Athletic Lab, but I did a podcast with him really recently. It was actually a few days ago, and he was just talking about like every single opportunity that popped up, he just said yes to it. And
Yep.
there's so many like unpredictable opportunities too. Like he had athletes who were trying to make money by illegally putting flyers on cars, like under windshield wipers, and then like a soccer coach happened to see the flyer, so he reached out. He started working with the soccer team that got him into soccer, and then suddenly like his big gig that kind of got him out of like struggling to make a living and struggling to get by with a massive soccer organization was because of just someone, you know, putting flyers out that they shouldn't have been putting out. And he took the opportunity. He had no background in soccer, knew nothing about it, didn't know how many players were on the field, and was like, okay, well, I guess I'll try to figure it out and see what we can do. And then, you know, you bring the background of, you know, his background of track and field. He was at LSU, working with the track and field team, and then the background in weightlifting, and then applying that to soccer, and it just happened to work. And that's, you know, kind of, you know, I don't know if, I think people love to hear this, but then it's hard to replicate it or duplicate it when you tell a story like that with your background, because it's like it's so inspiring, and it seems like it's, you know, so meant to be. But then you would think like, well, how would I do that? Like, how would I make
Just
that
say
more?
yes. Like just say yes. Every chance you get, say yes and work your tail off while saying yes. That's it. Like that's the whole philosophy.
Okay.
You
And
know,
then yeah,
say yes and work and be the hardest worker in the room. That's it.
yeah, and then it won't necessarily look the same, but it'll get you as far as you're able to go. So
Yeah, it'll look like what it's supposed to look like, you know?
yeah. Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. So after hearing kind of you know, give us a nice briefing on your background, the kind of the come up in weightlifting and strength and conditioning. Again, like we've had a handful of phone calls over the last, you know, few weeks, and then wanted to connect to make this happen so we could kind of share that with the bigger weightlifting world and, you know,
Yeah.
strength world, because I don't think a lot of people have a good picture of what you do, Spencer, on a daily basis and how you do it. and then how you also like manage to do it. So maybe you can describe a typical day or a typical,
Yeah.
the life of Spencer Arnold in the strength and conditioning and weightlifting worlds, and then how you manage all that, and then we can kind of get into the weeds of like how to do that well.
Yeah. So yesterday's a good like look at what like a normal day looks like for me. So I'm an early bird. I'm an early riser. I love the early mornings. They're easily my favorite part of the day. I go to bed excited to get up.
Mm.
Um, and so like so my alarm goes off at 3. I love that it goes off that early. People think I'm crazy, but I get up at 3 and I mean I like spend my morning by myself. So maybe the only still quiet place in my life. And so I just spend my morning breakfast, reading, writing, sometimes doing a little bit of work where I need to. But like I do all of that in my house, making coffee, like the stuff that like centers me every morning. I do that. Like, no, I don't look at my phone. I don't like, that's like kind of my time. So I do that from 3 to like, about 5:30 most mornings. Yesterday morning, it was till about 5. And then I'm out the door about 5:15 or so. Um, and then I go to the school on Wednesdays. We have a early morning football workout. It's called the Forge, which is basically like old school mat drills. And so I help run those for our football players, about 90 football players or so that come in the gym. They have to be here ready to go at 5:58.
Wow.
And so me and Coach Guest and the football staff run a mat drills with them till about 6:30 or 6:40, depending on how long winded we get. And then I leave the gym while he talks to them, and I go into the weight room, and the baseball team's in the weight room at 6:45. And so I have the baseball team running them. They're in season right now, so it's really important that I'm there. And so I'm with them from 6:45 to about 7:30 or so, and then they go shower and get ready for school. And I have about 20 minutes right there to kind of get the day ready, so like make sure the room is ready for the day and get everybody's cards out. And then I run strength and conditioning classes for all of our athletes at the school. So 307 athletes in a day, starting at 7:50. So at 7:50, every 45 minutes, a new group comes in. I get about 45 minutes for lunch in the middle of the day, and then I just run them all the way through. Our last group is football. About six, I think there's 64 of them.
Mm.
So they come in the last end of the day, and I run them till about 3. I think it's technically supposed to be 250, but they're done at 3. And then kind of wrap up, clean up, get the stuff set for the next day, and then I'm out the door at 3:15. And yesterday I drove to the gym and got to the gym, and everybody's warming up, supposed to have a bar in their hand by 3:30. And so I'm getting there about the time they've got a bar in their hands, catching their warm ups. Yesterday I walked in and the Filipino national team was there, so it was our team plus Heidi and some of her training partners. And so Team Canada comes in tomorrow.
Mm.
So it's like,
Wow.
you show up and it's like, all right, the last person you just coached was a 14-year-old football player, and now the next person you're coaching is like could be an Olympic gold medalist,
Mm.
and so it's just like one of those cool dichotomies for me. And so I'm at the gym from 3:30 till, depending on the length of the workout, depending on what phase we're in, depending on if it's competition prep, all that stuff, until about 6. My assistant, Angela, opens the gym and closes the gym for me, which is like maybe one of the biggest blessings on the planet. But she's there typically, obviously before me, and her job is to collect their relative RSI and ground contact time and do some force plate testing for readiness on them. So she collects all that data, and then I just look at the dashboard so that I can see kind of where they're at, and if I need to make adjustments to their training for the day or not, based on that information that she collects. And then I come back, then I leave the house. I leave the gym about 6 or 6:30, try to get to the house by 7 to be around for bedtime routines and put kids to bed and read books and all that stuff, and try to get everybody asleep and laid down by 8. And we have 3 kids, so that's a handful for my wife. And so I try my best to be there as best I can for that. And then about 8 o'clock, everybody's supposed to be in bed, and that gives her and I about 30 minutes to sit and talk. I'm generally eating dinner about then. Sit and talk, catch up for the day. About 8:30, we wind down and we go to bed. So that's kind of what a day looks like. All throughout that, like obviously I have 2 interns that help me with the GPS data and catapult stuff. So when I get in at 6, first thing I'm doing is pulling catapults and attaching them into the charging station and uploading data, and then running their and then washing all the vests. Right. My interns then come behind me, hang the vest, and we kind of push the data to the coaches once it's uploaded, and then we'll sit down and look at the data and make sure everything looks good. We had a girl that said her max velocity was 10 million miles per hour today.
Mm-hmm.
So like obviously that was wrong. So we had to scratch that data and pull it out and resend the data, that kind of stuff. So that's what a day looks like for me. None of that. That's if everything goes perfectly. I think I actually did get home last night. No, we went to a church small group after. So I got home at like 8:30 last night. The kids were already asleep, and I quickly took a shower and got to bed as fast as I could. So yeah, that's what a day looks like. Yeah.
Yeah, it's insane you can kind of keep that pace, because to do one day like that, it's like, oh, no big deal. But to do every day like that every week, I mean, to keep that pace is really impressive. And I guess also just shows how much you love what you do and how much you want to put into it and invest. Otherwise you wouldn't, spend so much time kind of trying to juggle all of that. So going back to the high school situation with all the teams that you do work with, maybe you can talk a bit about, so if we zoom out, maybe we can get a little more technical. What does kind of getting all of those teams set up for a season look like? Because there are periods of competitive seasons, um, where you have, okay, we're as far out from the season as possible, or the playoffs, or whatever it is, the championship, and then you have a number of teams you have to do this with. But what does the process of kind of preparing the team look like in terms of planning, and I guess all of the stuff that goes into getting you ready? So every single day when you show up, there's a plan in place, and the key is execution of that plan. So I guess how do we set yourself up so that when you come in day to day, you can carry all of that stuff out?
Yeah, man. That's a funny question. And again, this better than some. I'm a little bit obsessive compulsive about programming. I'm a little bit obsessive compulsive about making sure that like everything is perfect, and that we're just not programming for programming's sake, but we're doing it with a purpose, and we're analyzing what we do so that we can evaluate if we're accomplishing the goals that we set every macro and mesocycle. And so I have a template that I use that I've kind of orchestrated through Excel that lets me like sort of write the year out from a template standpoint, and lets me look at all of the data that would happen if this were to go the way I want it to. Right. So if I'm able to take a team from August to August, what does that look like from a volume and intensity and tonnage? What does that look like from a where are we spending most of our time in force velocity zones, and that kind of stuff. And so I'm able to look at them for the course of a year, and it changes every single mesocycle. Anybody who has a brain knows that, right? Like you write a plan knowing that it could look like this. And then every 5 weeks when we do a new macro cycle, I just changed how we did cleans and snatches from last mesocycle to this mesocycle, because I didn't like our start position, and I didn't like our inability to create force from a dead stop off the floor. Like it looked bad in assessment, and so I changed our complexes as a whole, like globally across the school for the most part, right? Like obviously exceptions to the rule, like baseball's not snatching in season, but I did macroly, like was able to change that because I didn't like as a whole, we just weren't creating enough force, and my eyes can pick that up. Like because of seeing enough weightlifting, I can see that like as a whole, our biggest gap here is like we pick up speed great at the knee, but we're not picking up speed off the floor. We can't create force from a dead stop, and blah blah blah. And so like that, I went in and changed that in a mesocycle, and then push that to everybody. But once I create a big macro plan like that, I do that for every sport on campus. So I have 17 macro plans for the year, and then every mesocycle I modify based on whether they're in season, out of season, preseason, postseason, all that stuff. and then obviously modify the movements. I take the general like starting line, imagine like I basically create a general template, and then from that general template, I deviate based on the sport, and based on the development level of the kid. And so if I take that general template and let's just use right now, if I'm a ninth grade baseball player, they're going to have more strength work than power work, or more force work than power work, because they're ninth grade in development. And I just think that being able to generate strength is more important early. I think once they reach a certain amount of relative strength, you can kind of pull back on that and be a little more power focused. But at ninth grade, like unless they're a varsity impact player, I can afford to do more strength work. And so they'll have more strength work over power work. Also will modify for their in season. They're throwing a lot. So we're not going to snatch. We're not going to jerk. We are going to, we're going to modify how we press. And so those modifications will go in. If I was a varsity, junior or senior, then obviously we'd be a little more power based. We do only probably have 1 day of heavy squatting, just to like allow for the season, because they play 2 or 3 games in a week. And so I do that for every sport for the year. And then every 5 weeks, we either assess, like they'll test every 5 weeks, or I just don't like where we're at, and we'll just hit the next mesocycle based on how I feel about like how the group as a whole is moving. If they're in season, it's very rare that you're going to see us test everything, just because it's not worth it. So it's just, that's how I do it. I'm sure there's 1,000 ways that could be done, and then obviously I pull all that data. So over the course of the year, I'm able to look and see like, how did we undulate through all of the factors you're thinking about when you consider a comprehensive strength and conditioning program for a sport. And then legitimately, it's like, once I set the mesocycle, it pushes. I've got the template set up so that it pushes to all of their individual names with their individual weights. So all their weights or their percentages or their speeds are, because we're a velocity-based program. We have a perch camera in every station. So most of their strength work is all velocity-based. So, but it'll all be specific to them based on what their terminal velocity is and what their 1 rep max is. And then that pushes all to them on a spreadsheet, and then I hit print 307 workouts and put them in plastic sleeves and hang them in the rack every period. So, wow. Yeah, that's what it looks like. It's not sexy. It looks like me staring at a computer screen for a long time, late at night typically. But I found that if I can use the summertime to create a macro plan for a sport, it just saves me during the school year, because I have something to deviate from rather than having to generate from scratch. So yeah, that's what it looks like. I'm lucky because I don't coach a sport. Like I'm not a head coach or assistant coach for any high school sport. So I'm able to like really, really focus on the strength and conditioning of all sports rather than having to be biased towards one or the other.
Right. And I think that was like a great way to explain to people how you structure kind of like the annual plan and then the components of the plan. And I think one thing people might be thinking or have thought is, strength and conditioning, it's not weightlifting, it's not powerlifting, it's not, specialized training for any other sport. It's supportive training for the competitive sport. And they think that, and then we have you who you've coached at the highest level in weightlifting, and maybe they're thinking, okay, well, like how would Spencer integrate weightlifting into strength and conditioning, given that that's what he knows so well, that you would want to take advantage of that. So maybe you can explain a bit, when we are looking at kind of those bigger picture plans, or even like mesocycles or training cycles or blocks, how do you integrate weightlifting in a way that makes sense for a strength and conditioning program? Also realizing that it's your bread and butter.
Yeah, I would just say this. I ran into my first conflict with Olympic, because if you're an Olympic biased strength and conditioning coach, like be prepared, right? You're going to take shots. People are going to take shots at you. They're going to say you're wasting your time. They're going to say all the things, right? Like it's dangerous. You're wasting your time. More bang for your buck if you do something else. Blah 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 blah. Right? And that's true. Like those people are going to come at you from the jump. I was not prepared for that my very first year in high school strength. And I was at a very baseball dominant school, and man, I wish that I was prepared because I was unprepared. But Coach Luttrell, because he's awesome. I remember calling and being like, what am I going to do? And he was like, Spencer, Why did they hire you? Like, why did they pick you to be their strength coach? And the answer is because of Olympic weightlifting. It's like they didn't want an Olympic weightlifting biased program. They wouldn't have hired an Olympic weightlifting coach to be their strength coach. So like, stick to your guns, be good at what you're going to be good at. Don't try and be the med ball guy, or don't try and be the band guy. Like, be the guy that they hired you to be. And so I took that to heart, and it has been the base of what we do everywhere I go. And the more I've done it, the more I'm able to defend it. And the more I've done it, the more it's proven its own efficacy. So I haven't had to defend it. But anybody who's been around Olympic weightlifting knows that like, they're kind of the like NyQuil of fitness, meaning like they cover so many different symptoms with one fell swoop. If I can be really good at cleans, I'm gonna be flexible, powerful. I'm gonna be mobile. All of the things that you're looking for in a high level athlete. And so I'm Olympic biased because I believe that the multi-joint intramuscular, like the intramuscular coordination from a multi-joint explosive movement, like a clean, snatch, or a jerk, has tremendous carryover to the field. And so that's why we do it. Now, do I do it like they're going to the Olympics? No, not even close. Like, not even anywhere remotely close to that, because they're not for weightlifting. If they're doing anything, they're going to go play Division I college baseball or football or basketball, right? And so that's what I'm preparing them for. But what that means is that they're every single day, every single athlete in every single sport will interact with an Olympic movement or an Olympic derivative in some way, no matter what. And so those are obviously modified for all the things that I already mentioned, like sport season development, but they're going to interact with it because the proof is like unnegotiable that like there is high efficacy for like carryover from the weight room to the field when you're good at Olympic weightlifting. Now, all that to say, that's my niche. Like, I've done it since I was 13. I've competed in it. I've coached in it. Like, that's my niche. I would be terrible at crushing med balls, but that's my niche, is Olympic weightlifting. And so I feel uniquely qualified and uniquely prepared to do what I do inside my weight room with the Olympic lifts. I think there are plenty of people out there who are not uniquely qualified or uniquely prepared to do it. And they should not do it. They should find what they are uniquely qualified and uniquely prepared to do and be really good at that. Because that's a disservice to their athlete when they try to be something they're not. And so that's like why I am the way I am with weightlifting. But yeah, like I said, if you walked into my weight room tomorrow, you're probably going to see a bunch of clean and jerks because it's Friday. And I had to keep some semblance of Max Out Friday in there, right? Like, we're going to clean and jerk. We're going to clean and jerk on Friday. Like, that's what we're going to do, unless there's a really good reason to not. And it's because we didn't clean and jerk the day before. We snatched the day before. And so like, that's who we are. I can point to all the reasons, and all that's the beauty of having a niche for data. I can point to all the data that proves its efficacy. And like, my school hired me because that's what I do. And they support me because that's what they knew they were getting. And so I'm just really blessed with good administrative support, and I'm with really great mentors. But yeah, we're gonna touch an Olympic derivative or an Olympic lift in some form or fashion every single day.
Okay, so how would that look, I guess, in practice, from the perspective of, you get a kid who comes in ninth grade, assuming you see them first at ninth grade, and they have no exposure to weightlifting. How do we get them up to speed? And once they're up to speed, what does that look like in terms of, a typical session? You mentioned they touch one of the weightlifting movements or a derivative, but we can kind of go a little bit into more detail.
Yeah, so I'll give you three scenarios, because this is typically the three ways I see a kid come into our program. The best scenario is they come in sixth grade, so we get them all in middle school. If they come in sixth grade, I can take a Learn to Lift program, something that would take a semester to teach somebody how to lift weights, and I can draw it out over 3 years. That's the hope, right? That we can spend a semester in the power position, and then we can spend a semester at the hang position, and then we can spend a semester below the knee, and then we can spend a semester floating. So they've spent 2 years doing the Olympic lifts and have never gone to the ground yet, except to pull on the way up, right? Like, they've done pulls and they've done lifts, but they haven't done it from the floor yet until they get to eighth grade. And so like, that's the hope, right? Like, if you get a sixth grader, by the time they get to ninth grade, I'm not teaching anything. Like, they've been doing it for 3 years with lightweight. They've been squatting and pressing for 3 years with lightweight, with velocity. Like they've been doing all the things already. That's the ideal. And about 75% of our kids are the ideal. So that's really good. We do get a lot that come in ninth grade. If they come in ninth grade at the beginning of the semester, I'll always take the first 2 weeks and reteach the lifts. Even if they've been in my program for at that point 7 years, I'm still reteaching. We're still talking about every little thing from grip to footwork to all of it. And so we're going to, if they come in then, they're going to learn they're going to do a 2-week introduction to the lift. And then if they've never been in my program before, they have to go through a semester long learn to lift program. That is exactly that, teaching them the Olympic lifts over the course of the semester. So 3 blocks of training, 3 5-week blocks. They'll move from their power position to the floor as long as they check all the boxes from a movement proficiency standpoint. We'll then progress them to the next block and then to the next block. We've had people who have come in and I've moved them to the 3rd block of that, in the first 2 weeks because they're so quick and they learn so. And then I've had people that it's taken them a year. But the only way they get to progress is if my eyeballs or one of my trusted assistants' eyeballs say, yeah, they're good enough to move on. So that's what it looks like. They come in 9th grade. The 3rd scenario happened today. We had a kid that came in. He's a rising senior. So he is he's never done an Olympic lift in his life. He's 18 years old, I guess 17 years old. And today he had to snatch. So I took him and we took he came because he's a high impact varsity player. He's going to be a really important player in multiple different sports in our school. And I saw him for the first time today. So I can't take a semester with him because he's gonna be gone a semester after that. And so with a kid like that, you give him the first progression for the Olympic lifts. We were snatching. I think we were actually doing power snatch plus overhead squat and then a full snatch after that. That was our complex in football today. And so with him, I said, hey man, every time it's your turn to snatch, pick up the bar and do a power snatch from your hips and then pause wherever you catch it and then do an overhead squat. Do 3 reps for 5 sets. When it's your turn to go, do your 3 reps and move on. And then and I'll just keep an eye on him, or my assistants will keep an eye on him. When he's moving really fluid through that, we'll progress him to the knee. And when he's moving through that, we'll progress him to the floor. And once he's able to do it really well from the floor for triples, then I'll integrate him back right in to everything else that we're doing. But he can squat well. So, same kind of process of squats. Can we do a goblet squat? Great. Can we do a front squat? Great. All right. Can we do a back squat? Okay. All right. Same thing with pulling, right? Can I do a hinge with a kettlebell? Great. Can I do a trap bar deadlift? Great. Can I do an RDL? Great. All right. Now we're rolling. So it's you just kind of check those boxes. You have to do that individually with each of those people, because you don't have many that come in that late in their career, in high school career. So you can kind of be focused on them, or I can assign a coach to them and say, hey, just keep your eyes on this kid. And so that's kind of how we do it from that perspective. But I mean, we're pretty traditional, man. It's three stops. We're going to start at the hips, then we're going to go to the knee, then we're going to go to the floor. If you're coming in high school, that's what we're teaching. If you're jerks, we're going to do push press, then power jerk, then split jerk. So we're going to follow a pretty traditional method. The only thing that checks the box, there isn't a magic number. There isn't a magic power output number. Isn't a magic relative to their body weight number. The only way they get to progress to the next step is me or one of my assistants that I trust says, yeah, they're good to move. That's it.
Yeah. And then you mentioned having the kid who has no experience coming in with the team and kind of regressing to the hip, doing a power snatch plus pause, overhead squat with a pause and the catch. Yeah. As far as the actual workouts that you are prescribing to the sports teams, because I'm thinking okay, I don't know. I guess you could answer this. I don't know if you use velocity with the weightlifting movements and derivatives, but how are you prescribing, weightlifting over, a macro cycle or a few mesocycles with weightlifting in S&C? And then what do those progressions or weights look like? So you're getting the training effect you want and making sure movement quality is there, but also utilizing the weightlifting movements efficiently.
Yeah, that's a good question. There are kind of 3 tiers that overlay each other in the way that I utilize them. First of all, big overarching principle is Also, one of the reasons we use the Olympic lifts is because they're hard.
Mm.
And so doing hard things generally translates to being good at sports. And so like making them perfect movements that are really challenging will make them better at their steps on the football field or on the soccer field. And so like we do them because they're hard. But the 3 tiers that we kind of progress through, one of the top tiers that changes how I write the workouts, or it's like how they're moving, right? So like if I see us, our hip, let's say this is what this happened, right? This is something that did actually happen, right? If I see like over the course of an assessment period that a lot of our kids, their hips are rising early and their shoulders are staying down and their hips and shoulders aren't moving together off the floor, that's a technical error. Like that's a red flag for me. And if I see that, then I'm going to create a complex that follows that macro or that mesocycle and the next mesocycle that addresses that issue. So what we did is like, I saw that. So what did I do? All right, we're going to do a pull to the knee, pause at the knee, go back to the floor, and then do the movement. So the first tier is like, what technical problems am I seeing and how do I address them in a complex so that they can then get better at perfecting the movement, because my goal is that they would perfect a really hard movement, because the perfection of a hard movement has a lot of carryover to the field and to life. So that's like first tier. Second tier for tiers aren't like rankings. Like this is something else that I do that kind of all bleeds together, is that my goal is out of season to be a little more high volume, higher repetition, lower intensity. So you're going to see us do lots of reps, perfect our technique, get really good at our technique, and do that at lower intensity. So lower percentages, 65, 70, 75% range. You're going to see that happen. And then as we progress into season, obviously, just like we're progressing towards competition, just like a competition preps, you're gonna see the rep count decrease and the intensity increase, because like I want them to be able to be peaking on really high power outputs and be like clean, like being able to show proficiency of really clean technique at higher level weights, because that's the goal. That's that, like ultimately, if I can create guys that can move really well through a snatch pattern at a weight that is challenging to them, then I know, like, man, there's pretty much anything they're going to be able to be asked of their coach, they're going to be able to do, right? Their kinesthetic awareness, their flexibility, their coordination, all those things are there. And so that's like kind of also lays over like our technical model is like the basic like undulation and decrease of volume and increase of intensity as we progress pre-season and then post-season. I love is when our basketball team just won the state championship. Our women's basketball team just won the state championship. They beat the team by 32 points. They're incredible. They're outrageous. Probably 5 or 6 Division I girls on that team. But what I was able to do was like pull back in the final like week and a half of their season and still do the Olympic lifts, but only do it at like 65 to 70%. And so they were flying, right? Like their technique was perfect and the bar was flying and they felt like they were on cloud 9 because the bar was moving. And anybody who knows, like I can do that for like 9 to 10 days and not see any real bad residual effects in their performance. And it'll be okay. Because remember, they're getting lots of other stimulus in practice and in games. And so like I was able to do that. But the only way I was able to do that is because we had spent since August developing that technical model and developing their ability to produce force against a really hard movement. So that's kind of that second layer that's in there. And then the third layer is like, how do the Olympic lifts fit with everything else we're doing in the weight room? So what I don't want to do is have a really hard Olympic clean session that pairs up with a really hard front squat or back squat session, or pairs up with a really heavy hard bench session, because in our system, everybody doesn't start on the same movement. They all start on different movements and rotate. And so if I have a heavy squat session and then I move from a heavy squat session to the bench, and let's say I'm doing incline, it's dumbbell, so it's light, and I warm my legs up, I get them, and then I go to incline bench, what's going to happen to my legs? Like they're going to get stiff. And then I move to a heavy clean session, that's not going to go well. And then they're not even going to have the ability to do the clean session well and fit the technical demands because of the previous fatigue. They're doing the hardest movement at the end. Like that's the opposite of what they should do. That sometimes is sports too, right? Like sometimes you have to be really proficient when you're most tired, but they're not going to be that ability. So what I do is I undulate like which movement gets the emphasis for the day. So like you'll never, like right now, if you come in here on a Monday, the emphasis is the clean. So they're going to do a clean pull to the knee plus a clean, and that's the heaviest, hardest thing they're going to do. And then the squat pattern that they'll move through is a safety bar split squat that is our accelerative strength focus. So everything they do is going to be above 0.5 meters per second. On a safety bar split squat, they're allowed to increase the load as much as they want, as long as they stay inside 0.5 to 0.75. And then they're going to do a barbell incline bench on, this is football team, barbell incline bench. That is kind of hard. Like, it is challenging. That's where I'm getting our absolute strength in for the day, is going to be the incline bench. But again, that's not that a really hard incline bench workout isn't going to have a ton of residual impact on clean or split squat. So that's how we do it. And then I just undulate which gets the emphasis for the day. Gotcha. And so they quote unquote heavy snatch day isn't actually that heavy for an elite, for a high school athlete, right? Because they're so much stronger than the weights that are on the bar. So that's how, like, those 3 layers ultimately determine how I program over the course of a macro cycle.
Yeah, that was incredible. It was I always ask these really big questions, and I'm like, oh, there's like so many directions someone could go. And you did a great job of answering it well and distilling down exactly what you do and how you do it. And I think giving, a lot of great information that's also very applicable, and I think people can kind of hear and then even take away, as from a weightlifting perspective. I think there's a lot of good stuff in there in terms of delaying maybe teaching progressions or being a little more relaxed about getting people up to speed and in actual like weightlifting workouts like immediately. As far as so all of that makes sense, and I think you detailed kind of like the bigger picture stuff. How does that change during the in season? So you kind of mentioned progressing it all, what the workouts look like, how you determine exercises, how you rotate through exercises, weights, and changes in weights. But like during the season, when people, I guess football players would be competing, about once a week, but baseball players, basketball players, soccer players, like there's starting to be multiple games per week. So what does the training look like when the athletes are in competitive season?
Yeah, kind of two things there. First of all, like when they get in season, I've got a GPS, like a catapult on every like impact player in season. So I'm able to kind of watch and see like what their trends look like over the course of the season. Are they getting faster? Are they running more mileage or less mileage? Is velocity going up or down? Is there player load going up or down? All that stuff. Like, I'm able to kind of monitor them from that perspective, and then adjust programming based on it. Like that happened with our women's basketball team in the first round of the playoffs. They felt like they were a little sluggish. I looked at and I was able to make some adjustments. But so that's like one level, is like I'm making adjustments based on objective data that I'm collecting from practices and games. And that the coach is telling me from practice. Like our track coach is awesome. Terrence Melton is a stud. And so I know that like on Tuesday and on Thursday, he's not sprinting. Like his sprinters are not running fast on Tuesday and Thursday. They're going to run fast on Monday and Wednesday. And so I make sure that our track athletes, and if they're football players, that's why you see them doing accelerative strength on the split squat on a Monday and not heavy back squats. Because like a lot of our sprinters are football players. And so they will get hurt if they come out of we're doing some AEL stuff with weight releasers. And if they come out of that heavy session and go straight to the track 30 minutes later to sprint, they're going to get hurt. And so some of it is like modifying what we do in the weight room to accommodate for practice load, impact load that I'm pulling from GPS data. The other thing is like the volume level. Like if you think about programming, like if you think about like hypertrophy and strength gain and like let's just say a accommodation work, like speed work, power work. You think of those as like dials. Basically, like they're never turned off. Like none of those 3 dials are ever turned off in my program ever for a high school athlete. Like we're always doing hypertrophy. We're always doing strength work. We're always doing some sort of like power emphasis work. Always. It's just a question of like which volume knob is turned up and which volume knob is turned down. And so as we get closer to season, the strength knob comes down a little bit. The hypertrophy comes down a lot. And the power one starts to inch up as we get into season. Like as they progress throughout the season, depends on how long their season is, depends on if we know they're going to go to the postseason, depends on if their coach tells me like, hey, our in-season schedule is kind of easy, or like our football team, like the first 4 or 5 games aren't going to be that hard. So like I can keep those knobs turned up or whatever based on that. And then I'll turn it down and turn up a different knob based on the season and their performance and how they're feeling and the feedback I get from the kids subjectively and the objective feedback I'm getting from GPS data. That's how I like modulate their program in season. And so like, I'm going to go watch soccer here in 45 minutes. And I'm going to be able to, we're in the smack in the middle of region play and like fighting for a region championship for both our boys and girls. And so part of it is like me going to a game and watching them and then watching the live GPS data while they're playing. Not only am I able to give the coach feedback and say, like, Coach Griff, like that, like this guy's player, like their acceleration rate is decreasing a lot. Like it might be good for you to give them some rest, right? And he'll pull somebody out for 5 minutes, let them rest, so they can go back and be back at like peak. So some of that like live feedback is really good, but also like it lets me see live what I see on a computer screen, you know? And so then that really impacts like next week, our soccer team goes through a freaking gauntlet. And I know they've got 3 really, really, really big games next week. So they probably like they got a big game Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. Wow. Like Monday, we'll probably be the only day we do any semblance of a workout that looks like what's on their paper. Will be the only day we do that. Because Tuesday I'm gonna do like a game day prep thing for them, so their legs are, because they're running, like girls are running 4 to 5 miles or so, guys are running 6 to 7 in a game. So you're talking about guys running 21 miles over the course of a week. Wow. Like my job is to make sure they can do that and then repeat it the next day against the region opponent for the region championship.
Right.
And so like we're not working out. Like all those volume knobs get turned way down. I'm gonna put them on a bike. We're gonna flush and like do some stretching. But that's what it looks like for me to modulate in season. Like, I tell people always sitting right in front of me on my desk is a dog chew toy of Gumby. And when I got my very first job, one of my best friends handed me that and told me to put it on my desk always. And it's to remind me to be flexible. And that's like a hard-nosed coach. And I've met so many of them would say, no, we work out in season. We work out on game day. That's what we do. And I'm like, yeah, like we do. And it does make sense sometimes to do that. But like also it doesn't sometimes. And that's okay for both of those things to be true and to exist in the same place, right? Like our baseball team worked out on game day against Franklin County, like against a region opponent on Tuesday, but they got a doubleheader today. So they didn't work out. Like they didn't come in this morning. They slept in. I told them to sleep in, and they're going to get home at 1 a.m. tonight, and they're not coming in tomorrow morning. Why? Because that's stupid. Like I'm not going to have 18, 17, 16-year-old boys who can't open their eyes at 6:45 in the morning try and come work out after a doubleheader. Like that's stupid. I'm not going to do that. And that's just like common sense. But that's not what the macro plan shows. And that's not what I designed in August. But it is what is necessary. And that's how, like, you've got to be able to modulate in season. And you've got to do it based on real data, not like your feelings, you know? And so that's like what it looks like for us. I'm really, really close with all of our head coaches. And so I'm able to bounce all these thoughts off them a lot. Like, and they're awesome. They just do a really good job of giving me really good, honest feedback on how they're feeling. So that's what it looks like in season.
Yeah. And I mean, listening back to this, and I mean, listening to it now, if I go and listen back to it, or when I do, I imagine I could pull out, 3 to 5 things that are like, okay, any high school SNC coach, these are like 3 to 5 points that seem to be very important. One, being flexible, managing volumes well in and out of season. It's like things that are kind of like not what I would consider like non-negotiables. From your perspective, having started from the bottom essentially, and gotten to this point where you're able to utilize catapult and able to have a perch unit in every rack, and then able to have all this data, have all these athletes that are tremendous and very successful, and then coach the highest level in weightlifting. What are your 3 to 5 takeaways from the time you've spent doing that you feel are almost like non-negotiables for people who are getting into the space?
Yeah, I think first non-negotiable is what I told you about Coach Luttrell advising me my very first year is like, be who you are. Don't be somebody that you're not, or don't try to be 7 people. Like, be who you are, be what you're good at, develop those things. Like I do need to work on understanding like med balls training. And I have a lot over the last 8 years, 10 years. Right. But that doesn't mean that I'm ever going to be the med ball guy. Like, be who you are. That's one thing. And the second thing is like, I can't believe I have to say this. Like I couldn't believe that I had to say this to the weightlifting world. And I feel like the weightlifting world has come a long way in America since I've like started yelling at them. But like, I can't believe I have to tell high school strength coaches, like, track your data. Like, for God's sake, know how many reps each team is doing in a week on each movement, and know if that's a lot or a little, and know if they're really sore at practice because of it or not. Like, track your data and adjust based on objective data, not based on a book, not based on your feelings, not based on your chip on your shoulder. Like, collect, analyze, and utilize data that is objective. Like that's a huge must have. If I walk into your program and you can't tell me what their average intensity is, or their average rep count is for that week and that mesocycle, I mean, I'm not saying off the top of your head, but they'd be able to pull it up. Like, that's a gap that you need to work on, because there's no way that you're able to periodize well over the course of a macro cycle if you don't know those things. So that's like a huge non-negotiable for me. So guys that generally like walk in there and pick up an expo marker and write incline bench 5x5 on the board, like, I'm already going to have an issue. The third thing that's a non-negotiable for me, and this is like kind of hokey, and like, there's going to be some like fire breathers out there that laugh at me, but like, remember that, like, the harder you push, the more they have to know you care. Like, the harder I push my kids, the more they have to know that I care about them. And that, like, the more uncomfortable I make them, because discomfort often is like the catalyst for progress, the more they have to trust me to do that. And they're not going to trust you if they don't know you, if they know you don't care, or they don't think you care. So like, that is a huge thing that I often have to remind myself of. They're not robots. They're not state championship rings. They're not medals. Like, they're kids that their parents are trusting me to invest in them, and it in a beneficial manner that impacts them way farther than high school. So like, the third non-negotiable for me is like, remember that if you're going to push them hard, you better care hard too. You better care a lot about them, because it's going to require big time trust for them to buy into what you're telling them to do. So those are kind of the three non-negotiables for me in high school, and I would say in college strength.
Yeah, that was incredible. And I think, this episode, as I mentioned, I'll listen back to it, but I think it's definitely worth a re-listen from everyone else who got to this point. So once we once we get through kind of like telling people where to go, they can just slide that dial back to the start, re-listen to it, and soak it in a bit more. Because I think from my perspective, having taken some of the courses you put out, or some of the like programming content, and read a lot of what you've written, and also just seen it and very mildly been involved from a like trying to learn from it and integrate it into my practice. I think in the strength and conditioning world, it's kind of an untapped resource. So hopefully people, feel like they can reach out and see you as a resource. And if they want to do that, where would we direct them so they can have access to you?
Yeah, no, that should probably be my fourth non-negotiable. Have an open door, answer emails, respond to text messages, like, for good gosh, like, give back to the community that's given so much to you. I like at the very beginning of this thing, how many people did I list, and how many people should I have listed? Right, like, I like, please give back to the community that is giving back to you. Easiest way to contact me. And like I said, there's a coach coming in Monday to spend the day with me. So like, this is not, I have coaches all the time who reach out. We set up a time, and then they spend, like, legitimately from the beginning to the end. Like, a lot of them have come with me to Power and Grace, like, left the high school and come to Power and Grace to see that. Easiest way to contact me is not Instagram. It's not Twitter. It's like, just email me. My Hebron, like, my school email is spencer.arnold@hebronlions.org. My Power and Grace is just spencer@powerandgraceperformance.com. Those are the quickest ways to get a response. I might, it depends on what you ask, I literally might just email you back, be like, here's my cell phone number, call me. We'll just do it that way. Or I might I might send you like a long-winded voice note. But those are the easiest ways. I do have an Instagram, Spencer G. Arnold. I don't have the app on my phone, so like, I try my best. Our Power and Grace is at Power and Grace Performance. and that is managed by somebody else, so that anything you put there will get to me. And then
Mhm.
Twitter, I am kind of active on Twitter, Spencer G Arnold for Twitter, and mostly you're just going to see that I just like to talk a bunch of crap on Twitter. I just really enjoy, and nothing about strength and conditioning generally. Like there is some, I guess, but like I love to like gas up our sports teams in the high school and talk about how good they are, and then just talk trash to their opponents we're about to play, which is like really hilarious from the guy who knows nothing about the sport, right? Like I was talking mad trash about our opponents and our women's basketball. And I couldn't tell you what defense we run. I couldn't tell you anything about this. I got a lot of jack about it. I just love doing that kind of stuff. So that you could probably catch me on there, but don't look for there if you're looking for real information. Probably just call me or email me. So that's the easiest way to get in touch with me.
Yeah, and again, I kind of mentioned that course, and then the content I've kind of consumed from Power and Grace. So I would implore people to implore people to go check that out and see if there's anything. No, you're good, man. I always make sure I got you. I'll make sure you check that out. I mean, if you want coaching too, if you're a weightlifter looking for coaching, and this is something that resonates with you, check out the website. If you're a coach looking for an opportunity to learn more from, the best, one of the best. Power and Grace has it all, so I would go there. If you're interested in hearing more from me, or you want to kind of follow my foray or my journey into strength and conditioning, you can follow me at Josh_Phil WL. That's PHILWL on Instagram, at Philosophical Weightlifting everywhere else, and we will catch you guys next week on another episode of the podcast.